it was quite a change from the Pueblo of Laguna to Palm Springs, and the presidents and the movie stars. But I'm going to show and talk about my stuff, and if we have enough time and if there's some interest, I can go in very quickly to some of my celebrity stuff. There's a couple, three that are pretty good there. So I'm from Laguna, Pueblo, which is 40 miles west of Albuquerque. And I went to the Albuquerque Indian School for a while in Albuquerque, and then I kept running away, so my folks put me in another school. And so I didn't get much schooling, but and I have had no formal training in art or photography, so I just sort of picked it up. And so I'll show some of the stuff here. Let's see. There's the Laguna, Pueblo, 1985. And up behind that is Mount Taylor. And I live right down to the right, that's where our trading post was. This was Laguna Deer Dance, 1947. And of course I knew, in the old days, I knew almost everyone on the reservation because I delivered groceries to their house. And this is one of the Buffalo Dancers, 1952. And most of these are medium format right now. This is one of my first pictures that I took with a Photographic speed graphic. This is old John Riley, and the real picture was he was beating the drum for his 3 grandchildren. They were dancing, and that's the shot I should have got, but maybe when I can't remember, maybe when I came up they stopped and scattered. I got their picture. But when I was back at the Smithsonian in New York, I asked the archival people, do you have anything on Laguna? And they went in and pulled the first one out they could find. It happened to be his picture when he was 25 years old. I recognized him immediately. And these are the kids that were dancing. And there's one kid looking out the window. We don't know which one that is. And, one of the girls doesn't like this picture, so it wasn't in my book. This is one of our leaders. I took this in 1949. The original was on 4x5 Kodachrome ASA 8, and I converted it to black and white. Of course, here's my most famous one, and I think I talked about it yesterday. I was delivering groceries, and he was sitting out sunning himself. So I got his picture, and on the same row I got the pictures of the little girls. But this is, like I say, gone all over the world. I'm put out approximately 20,000 posters. So they're scattered all over. This is, I call this blue corn, and it's one that I took in 1949 with the Kodachrome ASA 8. And the little girl in the background now works over the tribal building. And this is one of my favorites. It's a very popular shot. This is probably the oldest color. I'm mainly a black and white photographer, but I took this about 54 years ago. And the negative was so faded, I was going through my negatives and throwing some away, and I almost threw it away, and then I held it back, and we got a fairly decent print out of it. My mother was, of course, in the trading post. She used to remember this lady when she came into trade, and so I was glad I finally kept that. And then this is my second most famous picture. The Eagle Dancers will be the lead picture in the new book being put out by National Geographic and the Smithsonian for the opening of the new museum in Washington, D.C. in September. It'll be a double-page spread for the lead picture in the book, so I'm really anxious to see it. This is Etta, we used to call her Aunt Etta, and she was the best bread maker in the village. So every so often when she'd make bread, she'd bring some hot loaves of bread down to the trading post for us. And that was part of the fun of delivering groceries. We'd get a loaf of bread here and some tortillas there, and it was Christmas time and the snow was coming down, and I went into a house and the lady asked me if I'd like some chili on that tortilla, and I said sure, and she picked it up and I started eating as I was driving around the Pueblo, and it was so hot and I couldn't find any water. It was the hottest restaurant. And here's Bruce Riley. He was one of the war chiefs. In the old days, the war chiefs were responsible for the safety of the Pueblo, and that's an honorary position, and they still have it. And this is Juanita Cuisro. Her husband had a little herd of sheep about 4 miles east of Laguna. And my memory of her, he would stay down at the sheep camp and she would stay at the Pueblo because she had 3 daughters. And I remember her going with a heavy sack on her back, walking from the Pueblo down to the sheep camp. And then next day she'd be coming back, and that was continued when she was pretty old. I went to school with her daughters. And this is Santiago. This is 1949, and then I took some pictures of him about 50 years later. I don't have them in this, but I ran across a picture not too long ago. Someone was taking my picture. I had killed on an elk hunt. I had killed an elk with a .44 Magnum, and I had the elk on my Jeep. And I guess he came along walking up the road. In one of the pictures he came in and we took our picture together. And this is Jojo. He worked for the Santa Fe Railroad and lived in Barstow, California. And his dance troupe, he was over at the opening of the Indian Wells Hotel in Indian Wells, California. And he did the hoop dance until he got too fat to get through the hoops. And he had to quit. But he saved me from getting lost one time. We were deer hunting together, and it was getting about sundown, and we were in some of the ruggedest lava beds out south of Grants, and it's in there. It's like a jungle. And I was walking, thinking I was heading toward camp, and I bumped into him, and he said, "No, you're going the wrong way." And he took me back. My sense of direction was not so good then. And this is the lady is from one of our villages, Masita Village. Her name was Lola Steele. And when I was out in Palm Springs, my mother called one time and said, "Lola's looking for you. She needs to see you. So next time you come home, be sure to go down and see her." So I did. When I came in from Palm Springs, my mother reminded me. I went down to see Lola, and I knocked on the screen door, and no answer, and the door was open, so I went on in. She wasn't feeling good. She was laying down on the bed, but she got up, and I said, "Well, Lola, I understand you've been looking for me. What can I do for you?" And she says, "Well, I want you to measure a window glass for me, because you're the only one that can measure them right." So I went up to the trading post, cut the window glass, and took it down and put it in for her, and she thanked me. I said, "Well, I'm going to go back to California now, so if you get any more broken windows, just call me." She was great. This is a picture that this is my grandmother in the middle, and she took the first contingent of the Laguna Pueblo people that went back to Carlisle. She went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and that's my youngest daughter on the right and my middle daughter on the left. And I heard her reading this bear story or whatever it was, and I had my camera all set, and I just sneaked in. It was in the afternoon, and I took this picture, and it's one of my favorite of my grandmother, because I didn't get too many pictures of her. This is Acoma Mission, 1958. I shot that with a super wide Hasselblad. In 1958, I bought the super wide Hasselblad for $450, brand new. Today, the super-wide Hasselblad is about 5,500. This is one of our neighbors, Bill Pratt. He was a fire watcher out in Flagstaff, Arizona. He used to ride that horse to Flagstaff in the summer to watch for fires, and then in the winter he'd ride his horse back from Flagstaff. This is kind of a historical picture. This was the first election. They had the ballot box in one of the first elections there at Laguna, and this was it was December 3rd, 1940, or 1950. I'm not quite sure now on the date. My dad's in there, and so is my Aunt Susie, and most all of them are gone now. This is one of our governors. I was up taking his picture with Abraham Lincoln cane, and he asked me to take a picture of, these are all his boys who were in the Army. Let's see, about 5 of them in the Army. He was elected governor at Laguna, but he actually came from Zuni Pueblo. And there are the Abraham Lincoln canes. During the Civil War, I think 1862 or 63, Dr. Steck, who was the superintendent of the agency there, went back to Washington and was talking to Abraham Lincoln and said we should honor the Pueblos for being not warlike and doing anything against the United States government during the war. And Abraham Lincoln said, "What do you think?" And he suggested these silver-headed canes. So they were made in Philadelphia. The canes on the end say the name of the Pueblo and the date 1863, and then there's a fancy A, Lincoln. They weren't delivered out to the Pueblos until 1864. And all of the Pueblos have them except one. I don't know which Pueblo it was, lost theirs. And then one of the Pueblos, one of the governors got drunk and he was going around with the cane upside down. It's a very, excuse me, it's very soft silver, and people have a tendency to rub it, and the lettering is getting worn away. This is my daughter, the writer, Leslie Marmon Silko, who's written Ceremony and Storyteller and Almanac of the Dead and Gardens in the Dunes, lives here in Tucson. And that's with their horse, Joey. We paid $10 for him at a wild horse sale. And she was 8 years old, and she broke and trained him, and she used to ride all over the reservation and eat with the cowboys and round up cattle, and that's where she got a lot of her stories. There's old man Platero, and you look to his right hand, to your left there, he's got part of a finger missing. And he said, horse bit it off. So he was a delightful old character, and he's from Tehashale, which used to be Canyoncito, the Navajo tribe. This is Daisy Nampeo Hue. She was married to a man up in Zuni, and I met her there, and fabulous potter. And her life story is quite interesting. She was about 7 or 8 years old when she was beginning to lose her eyesight. And a very wealthy lady came through Hopi to buy pottery, and looked at her and said, well, they could take her to Pasadena and have a specialist look at her eyes. So she went off with a lady and had her eyes operated on and stayed with the lady till she was in her early 30s. And the lady was Lucky Baldwin's wife, Anita Baldwin. They named Santa Anita after her, and Lucky Baldwin at one time was one of the wealthiest men in California. And she traveled with Mrs. Baldwin all over the world. Mrs. Baldwin took her to Paris, and she went to a art school in Paris. She met Charles Lindbergh, and said at many of the ports, when the ship docked, there was a Rolls Royce and a chauffeur waiting in case they needed to go anyplace. But finally, in her early 30s, she decided it was time for her to get married and move away. And my aunt, what we call my Aunt Elizabeth, also worked for Mrs. Baldwin in Baldwin Park in California. This is a shot, of course I didn't take that. That's my grandfather when he was a teacher up at Acoma. And he taught up there about a year. And I don't know who took the picture, but I'm going to check into it. This is the old wall on Acoma, and this was on the cover of my daughter's book, Ceremony, the hardcover copy. And these are the little girls hanging clothes in the right there above the plaza there, and this is on the same roll as I took the right man's moccasin, the old man Jeff. But this has been a very popular picture. And some of the Laguna Eagle dancers. See? And some butterfly dancers. And I was walking out south of the Pueblo one day when I ran across this. I thought, that's the weirdest thing. I thought, stop and take a picture. And this is a padre going up the ladder. He was stationed at Laguna. Of course, Acoma was Pueblo, the church up there was one of his. And he wasn't posing for this. He was going up there, and I had one of these old 4x5 single lens reflex, very slow camera. So I took one picture. Of course, today I would have probably taken 15 or 20, and almost ruined it developing it. And he's buried by our mission there at Laguna. This is Benny, the sheep camp, and this was when I had a show in London at the Barbican Gallery with some other Native American photographers. This seemed to be the most popular one of my prints. And I just sold one of these just the other day, traded for this camera lens. It was one of them. This is Santana Melcher from Santo Domingo, Pueblo. She was one of the potters that went with us to the White House in 1974. We were over there to talk to her about going to, there were 13 potters that went to the White House to present some pottery to the permanent collection in the White House and kind of revitalize the pottery and do a little publicity for New Mexico. And this was the day we went by to ask her if she wanted to go. And it was very funny. It was early in the morning when we were over there, and her daughter was translating for us, telling her she was going to have to go to Washington and present a bowl to the, it wasn't that bowl I don't think, but to the president and all of that. And we were thinking, no, she's not going to go. She was sweeping the floor and she was listening. And then finally they said, well, will you go? And she just looked up, said yes, and she just kept sweeping. And she enjoyed the trip more than anybody in the whole group. And so Mrs. Nixon gave each one of the women some sort of thing, and the President Nixon gave us all presidential cufflinks. We spent the whole day in the White House, and we got the Secret Service. He told the Secret Service to let them see and go anywhere they want to go, so we had a VIP reception there at the White House. And this is old Lee Antonio. He was an Army veteran. He went up through Africa, up through Sicily, and Italy, and into Germany, and he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And while he was in the Army, why, someone took off with his wife, and he never got over it. So he lived out at the sheep camp, and he would come in on his little motorbike to get groceries and things. I wish I'd taken it in color because he's got the flag up there. Here's a typical section gang that worked out around Laguna. And when I was in the trading post, the section gang people would come in every Friday with their paychecks and buy groceries. This is Henry Ward Beecher and his wife. He was quite a leader there in Laguna. And this one I call the last wagons at Laguna. That's my daughter. If you look carefully on the fence, she's 3 or 4 years old. And I had a feeling that there wouldn't be any more covered wagons coming to our fiesta. From hundreds and hundreds when I was a small boy, they're down to just a few wagons. So I was working in the trading post, and I borrowed a camera and got up on the roof and took a couple pictures. And then sure enough, next year, no wagons appeared, no covered wagons. And that's what used to make the fiesta so colorful. People would come and camp and spend several days. Now people zip in and spend the day and they're gone. These are my 3 daughters. That's Leslie kneeling, and Gigi in the middle, and Wendy in the back there. This is a potter from Acoma, and she was not happy about having her picture taken. I did this for the high school. I can't remember why, but I remember she was not happy. This is a young lady up at Zuni. She was half Zuni and half San Juan, and I have that in color. This is another war chief from one of the Mesita village. And this is old man Teofilo. He was 85 years old, and he went out with a group going deer hunting. And all the hunters went out, and he stayed back at the camp. And a deer come through camp, he shot it, skinned it. They came back. They came back, and they didn't get a deer. And then my daughter used his character in one of her stories. Here's Bronco Martinez. Almost everybody in New Mexico knows Bronco. And I haven't seen him for quite some time, but the last thing was I took his picture. He wanted a picture for an album cover. And he made a CD, and everybody said, God, he's a terrible singer. Awful. But he also was auctioneer, and he was on the radio, and I assume he was quite a rodeo cowboy. And then this is my Aunt Susie's half-sister. She lived to be 105, and my Aunt Susie lived within a week of 111. And how I took this picture was my mother was helping her cross our backyard, and my mother told me to get the picture, and I said, oh, it's the wrong time of day and all of that. My mother said, no, you better get it now. So she got a kitchen chair, and I sat her in the middle of the yard and got this picture. And of course, I'm glad I did. Here's some lady, the grinding plaster. They soak the plaster, and then they grind a little bumps out of it and make it real smooth. And this the lady at the right here is old man Jeff Whiteman's Moxon's daughter, and then I knew all the other ladies. This is one of our ex-cowboys. Interior of the Acoma hallway. I'm going to have to hurry here because we try to cut these down. This is the buffalo dancers on the sand dunes. It's another one of my favorites. This picture was taken by one of the Albuquerque newspapers. I finally found the date, and I'm going to try to find the story. This was 1928. My grandfather, who came from Ohio, is on the right, and then that's John Gunn, also from Ohio. And this was the last of the scouts. They were active from 1881 to 1886. The territorial governor asked my great uncle, who was in the Civil War, to raise a militia because the Apaches were raiding throughout that time pretty heavily. And fortunately, they didn't meet too many Apaches, so they all made it back. But when the territory asked them to quit their fields and their jobs and get their horses and furnish their food and everything, the territory said the only thing the territory furnished was their rifles and ammunition. So at the end of these campaigns, all the men got were a certificate, what they call certificates of indebtedness by the territory of New Mexico, and they never did cash them. My grandfather, being the captain of the troop, eventually bought them all. He paid, it was his men, and he paid them as little as, long as he could. So I have them all today, and we never have found out why the territory never paid them, but they never did. And I'm going to, this was, I guess the newspaper wanted to do a write-up on this. This is the last of the scouts, and I got to find that newspaper. This is the Laguna Mission. It was established and dedicated on July 4th, 1699. That's the one you see from the, it's on the top of the hill. When you go down Interstate 40, you can see it. This is off the top of the Acoma mission. And this was taken, as someone asked me to mention something about cameras, I should. This was a 16 millimeter camera, 16 millimeter lens. This is Lucy Lewis, one of the famous potters from Acoma. She received some sort of medal from the president, and there's quite a book out on her, and she was one of the finest potters up on Acoma. This is the old man I was talking about, Mateos Mexicano. I wanted to get a picture of him, and he was kind of reluctant, so the guy with me said, well, why don't you offer him something? I said, well, what about $2 silver and 4 pounds of coffee? And he said, okay. But, oh, and we should have taken this one out. I don't like this picture of me. This is out of our place at Dripping Springs, and that's another one. And there's, I'm on by Sacred Mountain up at Zuni, and a friend of mine took that picture. This is the color off of Acoma, and the two girls on Acoma. There's Sky City from the south with Enchanted Mesa in the distance there. I climbed that in 1980. I thought it was 82 when I was looking at my book last night with a young lady here from Tucson that climbed with us that day, and it said 1980, so we were arguing over that as a black and white. And the graveyard. And of course, my grandfather taught, to the right of the mission is that where the school was. He was the first white government teacher to teach on Acoma in 1872. And this has kind of got an interesting history. I printed this up not long ago and was looking at it, couldn't decide. I knew it was Fiesta Day, but I couldn't figure out what year. Looked up in the left-hand corner, and my wife was pregnant with my youngest daughter, and so it had to be September 19th, 1951. And this is the Chaco Canyon. This is up at Pueblo Village. Curtis took a picture here. That's the reason I took this. This is where Curtis took one of his pictures when he was up at Poi. And cloudburst over the lava beds. And this is Spider Rock in Canyon de Chelly. You can't hardly see anything down there now. There's so many trees. And one of our Pueblo girls before the dances. Some of the kids. That's some Roadrunner tracks. This is the Rileys with the melon. I was asked to take their picture, and he said he wouldn't let me take his picture unless I put the melon in there. I said, okay, whatever you want. I let people guide just however they wanted their picture taken. I never tried to change it. All we didn't need, that's a jabalina that was shot with an arrow. It was up at my daughter's ranch here in Tucson. The dog brought it in. This is a blue corn from San Ildefonso Pueblo, quite a famous potter. Acoma from the air. I have to tell the story of this one. I hope I'm not, am I running too long? Am I okay? Anyway, this lady here is Juana Scott Pino, and she comes from up near Pueblo Village, a place called Chinatown. And there's an argument over why they call it Chinatown. There was a fellow out there that looked Chinese, and then they said, no, it was somebody that served in China during World War II. Nevertheless, her granddaughter wanted to take her out to California to Camp Pendleton to see her grandson. And so she went out in her regular garb. Somehow in the base paper at Camp Pendleton, Walt Disney heard she was going to be there. And so he invited her and her family to come to Disneyland to spend the day, and he greeted them. And there was a picture on the front page of the Los Angeles paper, her and the Flying Dumbo. So she had a pretty good adventure. There's a color of Yakima. And there's the Laguna mission in 1949. It's changed now, as you'll see. There it is today, when we had our 300th anniversary in 1999. It's an interior when they were plastering the floor. I took some pictures in there. It's a very pretty mission. And how are we for time?
He's got some more.
Pardon?
No more time.
No more time? Okay. All right, well then that's it. We'll go into the